This is Grand Harbor, Malta, and today it's a popular tourist resort, but in the Second World War, it was the most important harbor on the Eastern Mediterranean. And it was so important that the Germans had to control it, or they would lose the war in North Africa. And to do that, they employed siege techniques, starve out the population, and to bomb them into submission. Malta became the most bombed place on Earth. We've come back to Malta to tell the story of the Great Siege, one of the most important battles of the Second World War. We want to look into the people who were here, the civilians, the gunners, the Navy and the Merchant Navy, and of course the legendary fighter pilots who won the Siege of Malta. This is Republic Street in Valletta, and it's the most popular tourist destination. The tourists come to Malta for a lot of reasons. One is to buy stuff from the shops, the great tourist trinkets. The other is for the sun and to party. But Malta also has an incredible history that goes back over 6,000 years. In fact, there are ruins from 3600 BC. This is a ruin from a more modern time. This is not a Roman ruin. This is what's left of the Valletta Opera House. It was carpet bombed by the Germans in April 1942, and much of Malta was like this. This was a beautiful building. Here you can see what's left of one of the columns from the Grand Opera House. You can see where the bombs or shrapnel, really fragments from the bomb, would have taken off a piece of it. And this is really a symbol of what happened to Malta during the Second World War. The most severe raids took place in 1942, but the first one came over with the Italians on June 11th, 1940.
In the late spring of 1940, the tiny island of Malta is a quiet British outpost in the middle of the Mediterranean, far from the war raging in Western Europe. But with the entry of Italy and its colonies into the conflict on June 10th, Malta becomes a principal target for the Italian Air Force. The island now lies at the heart of a vast Axis empire. To the south, some 250,000 Italian and colonial troops are within striking distance of the oil fields of the Middle East, oil that could fuel the Axis war machine for years to come. Seeing Malta as a threat against their Mediterranean supply lines, Italy unleashes its formidable air force in a bombing campaign against the island. With only 4,000 troops and no fighter aircraft to speak of, Malta is all but written off by Allied command. Now the island's last remaining hope lies with a small force of anti-aircraft gunners.
I'm with Major Maurice Ejus of the Royal Malta Artillery, and this is one of his gun emplacements during the Great Battle for Malta. So I want you to explain to me how you laid out your battery.
Yes, well, we had a command post over there.
Right.
And 4 guns, starting from number 1 on the left, number 2 gun, number 3 gun, and number 4 gun.
Here, this is where the gun would have been.
That's right, yes. It used to be stuck to the ground by means of nuts and bolts. It was a 3.7-inch heavy attack gun. The shell was 28 pounds, 28.5 pounds. And the cartridge was about that high.
Your objective was to shoot down and harass.
That's right. The Italians, they used to come at 23,000, 25,000 feet and never changed direction, never changed height, and never changed speed. And as soon as you see a sparkle in the sky, and you say, it's plane! Plane! When they get too close and they start a deeper dive, then you can't fire anymore. And the operations room used to order barrage 6,000 feet. Each gun position is given an area in the sky to shoot at.
This strategy, known as the box barrage, forces attacking bombers to ascend to higher altitudes over the intended target, hindering their ability to bomb accurately. As planes approach, anti-aircraft units unleash sustained barrages at predetermined angles, creating a box of withering fire that will blast any aircraft attempting to fly through from the sky.
And one plane is shot down. Then you get another half a minute or so, and a second plane comes. And occasionally, you know, all 5 were shot down. At the early months, it was the gunners who actually saved Malta.
The defenders managed to hold out through the midsummer of 1940. Hoping to capitalize on their success, the Allies send 24 Hurricane fighters to Malta, along with experienced pilots from all over the Commonwealth, who quickly chase the Italian bombers from the island's skies. It's the first of 2 devastating setbacks for Italy in the latter half of 1940. In December, the Italian 10th Army is defeated in Egypt by a much smaller British force. And by the end of the year, the Axis is in real danger of losing its foothold in Africa. The Allies are on the offensive at last. But for Malta, this new optimism will be short-lived.
After the initial attacks by the Italians in June 1940, things went pretty quiet in Malta. A lot of the people returned to their homes, and war didn't seem to be such a bad thing after all. But in North Africa, things were changing. The Italians were failing miserably against the British, and now the Germans were to step in. So once again, Malta was going to be a target, this time for the German Luftwaffe.
January 1941, a small British-led force on the tiny Mediterranean island of Malta is held out against 6 months of attacks by Italian bombers. With Malta's skies clear, the Allies begin using the island as a base to attack Axis supply shipping bound for North Africa. Fearing a total loss of Axis holdings in North Africa, the Germans dispatched General Erwin Rommel to regain control of the situation. But if Rommel is to defeat the Allies in the desert, Axis supply routes across the Mediterranean must remain open. In January, the Axis resumes its bombing of Malta, this time under German command. Their mission is to bring Malta to its knees. Among the civilians seeking shelter from the bombardment is Joseph Attard.
I'll have to go down slowly,
Yeah, go down slow.
because I'm not
So-
steady on my legs.
So,
Yeah.
tell me how things changed in January 1941.
Well, a good amount of the bombs dropped on this place here. That was blown down to the ground. All this building. We had 40 people blocked down there, trapped, because there is the crypt down there, and it was used as a shelter. I came here, and I went to the church, and from there was the beginning of the rubble. But we couldn't get on to them. For a couple of days, we could hear the moaning. There were some of them who were still alive. And tears come into my eyes. I was so close to them, and yet so far. we found a baby, which was still alive. I pulled it out together with the others, and that was the only person we saved from there. The others were all dead. Those are the names of the people who were trapped and killed here. I can see their names now. But most of them I know personally, those people. Now, one I know, for example, let me say her name. Chettina. Now, Chettina was a young girl of my own age. She had very good looks. Who was carrying the baby I saved. It was not my baby. Yes. Chetta. Well, I remember Chetta.
Through early 1941, the bombing campaign intensifies. But in May, Malta is granted a reprieve when the Luftwaffe force attacking the island is reassigned to the Eastern Front. The Allies take full advantage, resuming their raids on Axis supply lines to North Africa. By the end of 1941, they are inflicting 80% losses on Axis shipping. But in December, with Rommel in full retreat, the Luftwaffe is ordered back to the Mediterranean with orders to destroy Malta's defense force in advance of a planned invasion. And this time, the Germans have a new weapon, the high-speed Me-109F. These new fighters easily outmatch the Allies' Hurricanes, which are shot out of the sky in alarming numbers.
This is the city of Rabat, and a lot of the RAF pilots were billeted here, and this is where they found their entertainments. February and March 1942 were terrible months for the fighter pilots. Their Hurricanes were grossly outnumbered by the Luftwaffe, and the Me-109F, the modified fighter, was just too much for the Hurricanes. So Buck McNair, the Canadian ace, decided to take some of the pilots of 249 Squadron out for relaxation. So on the night of March 21st, 1942, they went down to the theater to watch a film. In the middle of the film, the air raid siren went off, they decided to leave, and they had to come along this street, hiding in each doorway just to be safe from the bombing. When they finally got to this point, they're going to go over to the Point de Vue, which was the officers' mess, for a stiff drink. And as they went through this door, they started to approach it, and all of a sudden, bang! A bomb went off. When McNair awoke, he was on the second floor and didn't know what happened. And when he made his way down, he found the bodies of his friends. The building still shows a lot of damage from the one bomb. You can see holes here, all along the wall, even on the ceiling. In March and April 1942, no place was safe in Malta. The Germans were literally neutralizing it. They're bombing everywhere and everything in their preparations for the invasion.
The Germans attack the island day and night, bombing harbors, airfields, and civilian targets. Malta's cities and towns are reduced to rubble, forcing virtually the entire population to seek refuge underground.
This is one of the communal bomb shelters in Vittorioso in Malta. And this is where the whole population of Malta would live, or at least they'd live underground. You can see that this is all limestone, and it's all hand-chiseled. Here are the pick marks up here. And the advantage to the Maltese is that their whole island is a limestone rock, which is quite soft. That meant they could dig in. So when the Germans bombed, the whole population went underground. This shelter is about 150 feet underground because it's built into the ramparts of an old fort. And you can see here, this is the sleeping quarters, and you can imagine how cramped the conditions would be and how stale the air. Personally, I don't like small places. I don't know how long I'd last, but I'd much rather be under here than having to face the bombs. These little holes are very well-planned ventilation shafts. And of course, they'd have to drill them all the way through to the top to get some fresh air because the air down here would be totally stale. Even now, with just a couple people around, you can tell it wouldn't be very comfortable. And if you had a whole bunch of people, families, hundreds of people here, they probably couldn't wait to go upstairs. But during April 1942, the Germans were bombing so often, every few hours, that they had to stay down here almost 24 hours a day. They didn't realize it, but the Germans had dubbed Malta the Hornet's Nest, and now they were going to smoke it out. To do this, they brought 600 aircraft, including 300 fighters. Now, the people could stay underground and they'd be protected from the bombs, but that wouldn't save Malta. Malta needed a new fighter. They needed Spitfires.
April 1942. The Mediterranean island of Malta is under constant attack by the Luftwaffe. Speedy Me-109F fighters have overwhelmed the island's force of Hurricanes, opening shipping lanes to resupply Rommel's Africa Corps and allowing bombers to release their payloads on the island with little or no opposition. With a few pilots still flying in Malta's defense, death seems only a matter of time as the Luftwaffe hounds them relentlessly.
This is the Cali airfield, and during the Second World War, this was one of the most important fighter bases for the defense of Malta. And now, the only airport that this serves is for the model airplane guys, and you can hear their engines going and flying around here. This was the original base of the Hurricanes 249 Squadron in May 1941, and this was the centerpiece for the defense of Malta. And of course, the Germans knew this, and it was constantly strafed and bombed. They come over 6, 7, 8 times a day with 100 bombers, and they just pound the hell out of this place. And by the spring of '42, there's only half a dozen serviceable Hurricanes in operation, and they were no match for the Messerschmitts. They had been upgraded. So the only way Malta was going to survive was to bring in Spitfires, and a lot of them.
But delivering the fighters to Malta poses a significant problem. Gibraltar, the nearest British airbase, is 1,200 miles to the west, well beyond the Spitfire's range. The solution is simple but risky. The Allies load the fighters onto aircraft carriers and sail them to within 700 miles of Malta. From there, pilots take off and run a terrifying gauntlet of prowling Me-109s, hoping to reach Malta before running out of fuel.
I'm here with Ian McLennan, who flew Spitfires in the defense of Malta. He arrived in July 1942, and he shot down 7 aircraft and was a Malta ace. So within landing, even 24 hours, you saw your first German airplanes?
Oh, well, when we were landing, there were Germans all over the place. Of course, it was being strafed and bombed. And you could just see, I'd never seen it in my life before. 109's coming right at you, and guns flaring. 88s are dropping bombs around. I'd never seen anything like it in my life. It was a hectic time, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There was no time to be scared. You just, what you were doing, get your Spitfire down. And then running, someone would wave at you and you'd run and get down into cover.
So this was the old Cali runway.
Right.
And of course, it would have been grassed?
No, there was nothing like this. It was just a grass drone. And And they kept it. Now, it was always being mended because they were trying always to kill the airfields. The trick was to stay alive.
So once the Spitfires came in down here, they'd be pulled off into a splinter pen. They'd be refueled, rearmed. The pilot would get out, a fresh pilot would get in and go up and join the melee.
Yeah, sure. But the ideal thing was to get up to around 30,000 feet, hanging on your props, waiting for the bounce. So they're coming at you from Sicily, and you're sitting in the sun, and they can't see you. You see these tiny little specks. And maybe there'd be 40 Junkers 88s, and maybe 30, 40, 50 109s. You made sure you gave your guys the best chance for the first bounce, and down we go at them. And if you saw somebody in trouble, somebody coming up the ass, you would say, break. And if you didn't know who it was, you'd say, break, and everybody broke. I remember once getting bounced, so I just went into a spin and let my aircraft spin all the way down. Obviously, I was shot down. And then when I got right down the water, and the battle's up there, then I pulled it out.
So you played dead.
Yeah, oh yeah. I can remember, I remember the first time I did that thinking, this is very bright, because I got away with it. I think the guy, I'm sure he went back and said, I got this guy, he went into the sea. He's dead. The trick was to get up close, give him a bit of a lead. And if you were flying right behind him, slightly above, coming down.
126 Spitfires that reach Malta have an immediate impact on the island's dire situation. Daylight bombing raids on the island are drastically reduced. And despite being outnumbered nearly 2 to 1, the Spitfires downed 207 enemy aircraft in their first 2 months of action alone.
The aircraft that made the difference in the battle for Malta was the Spitfire. And this is an example here.
A most graceful, it's one of the most beautiful aircraft, isn't it, really?
Yeah, it's a wonderful design.
Well, these are the things that did the greatest damage. This is a 20 millimeter and a SAPI ammunition, semi-armor piercing incendiary explosive. So it would go through steel, burst everything. These are the things that blew things apart. The machine guns didn't do as much damage, but mind you, they could kill. You had 20 seconds, 30 seconds firing. So that means you learn to nurse it. Because once you're out of ammunition, you're very vulnerable. You're nothing, obviously, but still, you then have to get out of the fight. These are 20 millimeter shells, and it is armor piercing, and it's explosive. So it's a very deadly weapon going into another aircraft. Whereas machine guns just go through, and if it hits you, you're dead, or if it hits something vital, it's dead. But these things do a lot of damage. Blow controls away and all that sort of thing. The wing will come off, a tail will come off. It's just devastating. Whoop. Thanks. Okay, you guys, chalks away. Looks familiar, really familiar. Well, this is the joystick. This is the firing machine. This is, you push that, you get machine guns. Press that, you get everything. Cannons and machine guns. There's one thing here which is for emergency. If you're facing death and you can't get away from some guy and you need power, you take this thing and you push it forward, and it adds water to the gas and gives this engine tremendous power and boost. You have to look over this boost thing. There it is. And you couldn't leave it on for more than a few seconds or the engine would burst, would disintegrate. I remember several times looking at it, flirting with the idea I'm going to use this bloody boost if I don't get out of this fairly quickly. And I think I did it once, but you really didn't want to do it. And I think if I did it, I probably did that. And then did that. And I got away.
But are you proud to have served on Malta, to have fought on Malta?
Well, I guess so, yes. I'm not ashamed of it, you know. Yeah, I'm... Yeah, well, there were a lot of guys like me, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Despite the best efforts of the newly arrived pilots, Malta's fate still hangs in the balance. In June, 2 supply convoys set out for the island, but Axis forces still control the surrounding sea and skies. Even with heavy escort, only 2 Allied ships managed to arrive safely. By midsummer, with no further relief on the horizon, the island is on the brink of capitulation. The population is down to its last rations and will not be able to hold out through fall. The pilots, too, are feeling the strain, plagued by poor food and extreme lack of sleep.
They were stressful, tiring times. You get up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning and you're on service till dark. And that might go on for 3 or 4 days, but exhausting. I think everybody was hungry all the time, somehow. And the Maltese people were practically starving. And every now and then you'd get ill, you'd have malted dog, or they call it dysentery and that kind of stuff. Everything seemed to be bombed, you know what I mean? Rubble was everywhere. They're cleaning up the rubble and people are walking through, and it stays that way perhaps for months. So it was walking through a beleaguered city full of ruin. And there were air raid shelters down underneath all this limestone, stairs and everything going down. And I remember on one occasion, I started for it, and then I saw a woman sort of running towards it. And I didn't like the feeling of it. I think she was terrified, and I thought she's going to hurt herself. So I started to try to cut her off to reassure her and slow her down. But I missed her, and down she went. And when I went down, she was dead. So, you know, distressing. Very distressing.
This was happening all over Malta.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Every day. Just, it was a bad time.
August 1942. The war for North Africa enters its climactic phase. The Allies have stopped the advance of Rommel's Africa Corps at the First Battle of El Alamein, a victory due in great part to Malta-based attacks on Axis supply ships. For the Germans, the situation is now clear. If they hope for a victory in North Africa, it is imperative they eliminate the threat from Malta, once and for all. In the late summer of 1942, dogfights between Spitfires and Me-109s rage over the island, as the Luftwaffe attempts to wear down the outnumbered Allied defenders.
This is the Chara Palace in Medina, and now it's a 5-star hotel, but in 1942, it was an officer's mess for 249 Squadron, as well as 1 or 2 other fighter squadrons that served at Takali Airfield. And of course, from this position, you can see Takali Airfield just over here, and the pilots who weren't flying could get an excellent view of the dogfights that would go on. So you'd watch the dogfights, so on your day off?
From time to time, yes. You know, you can imagine they're way up there, they're high, and it's fascinating. It's like a small opera, but you can't tell who's who, really. But it can change suddenly. Dogfights varied. There could be 6 Spitfires going after the 3109 strafing right in front of you, under 2,000 feet. Almost you could touch it, you're scared. Guns are blazing or are about to blaze. So it's quite dangerous, and you can hear the bangs and the crashes.
Malta had a lot of great fighter aces. And of course, George Burling was at the top of the list. What made him different?
Well, that he was a phenomenal fighter pilot. Oh, yeah. You didn't argue about it. The guy was coming down with kills all the time. Nobody else could match it. Nobody. And there were some great fighter pilots in Malta. Burling had great eyesight, you know, the little specks. Okay, that, my whole life at that time was little specks. Every time you went up and you were called, you looked towards Sicily for the little specks.
I scrambled to take on 2 Junker 88s, escorted by about 20 ME-109s. 2 MEs got the drop on me. I did a quick wing over and got onto one's tail. He saw me coming and tried to climb away. I figured he must have been about 800 yards away from me when I got him into my sights.
At this distance, Burling is engaged in a war of invisible numbers. His Spitfire is traveling at 250 miles per hour, while the ME-109 is climbing at a rate of over 50 feet per second. The equation grows even more complicated when he factors in the velocity of his weapons. In essence, Burling must not shoot directly at his enemy, rather at a point in space where his enemy and his fire will precisely meet.
I gave him a 3-second burst, smack onto his starboard flank, and got him in the tank. It was a full deflection shot.
He was a pilot who was better than anybody else. He would have been difficult to handle in the squadron because he's so bloody bright and knows what he's got to be doing. And he's better at it than anybody else on the squadron. And he knows it, and they know it, which is not an endearing trait. You know, to be better than everybody else. He didn't have the freedom he needed. He was frustrated. That's the problem. And that made him a troubled guy and a trouble to anybody who had to handle him, I'm sure. But he could have been handled if somebody took the mind to say, look, we've got ourselves an ace here.
By August, Burling was already a legend in Malta. He had 15 kills. He had at least half a dozen probables and damaged. He was the #1 fighter pilot on Malta. But every pilot knew at some point his number could come up. On August 8th, 1942, Burling's number came up.
A bunch of yellow-nosed ME-109s were waiting for us, and every mother's son of them stayed to fight. I quickly turned to get under one of them and gave him a 2.5-second burst. I hadn't any more than begun to dive when I got mine.
We're trying to find Buzz Burling's crash site of August 8th, 1942. The passage of time makes examining any battlefield difficult. Of course, specifically, exactly where it took place in the field, well, that's another story. Then you need an eyewitness. This is the village of Guja, and it's near Lucca Airport, and we think we found somebody who witnessed the Burling crash. This is quite amazing, considering how few people would have seen it in the first place. So I'm going to talk to him. Hello, Joseph. Hi.
How are you? What you got for it?
I came to find out about the Buzz Burling crash site. You're the eyewitness we're looking for. So, Giuseppe, what did you see when the Spitfire came down? So he's maneuverable, and he's coming into the ground, close to the ground. Where did the plane crash?
Between here Gudia village and Tarishan.
We're just on the outskirts of Guja, and we're going to try to find out where Burling came down in his famous and very lucky crash on August 8, 1942. They were chasing after a gaggle of Germans over in this area. They were going after Grand Harbor. And just somewhere to the east over there in the sky, a dogfight developed. Now, Burling had already had 15 kills. He went in, and with some very fine deflection shooting, he had his 16th. The Me-109 went down. The problem was somebody got him, and he got hit in the engine, and his engine cut out and died, and he's stuck in the middle of a dogfight with no engine.
The old Merlin wouldn't give me any more than 160 miles an hour and was heating up fast. The Spit was sinking slowly. It had begun to look like a bailing job.
By the time he gets his harness all set, he's down to 200 feet. He's got to be going about 100 miles an hour. He came down gradually by that church over there.
Right ahead, I could see a nice plowed field, about an acre in size, surrounded by low stone walls.
Now, the danger here is all these stone walls. If a Spitfire hits one at 100 miles an hour, you're a dead man.
I slithered along, cutting the glide fine, but not too fine. It's damned easy to flip these spits and spit in. Gotta try to keep that nose high.
Burling's Spitfire came across this field, makes a belly landing, and just as it's about to hit the wall, he tips the wing down, and it stops cold. Climbs out of the cockpit, inspects the plane. He had nothing but a cut. He'd escaped his first dangerous clash with death. He'd lived to fight another day.
But struggle as they may, fighters alone cannot save Malta. The island is nearly out of food, fuel, and ammunition. In August, the Allies launch one last effort at resupply. This convoy must reach Malta, or all efforts to defend the tiny island will have been in vain.
By the end of July 1942, Malta was in dire straits. The Spitfires had alleviated the attacks on the island, but it was simply rubble. They had bombed everything into oblivion, and now the people were starving. They had no ammunition, and their fuel was low. They knew that the only way to survive was a do-or-die convoy, and it was codenamed Operation Pedestal, and it left England in early August 1942.
Tensions run high on both sides as the convoy enters the Mediterranean. The Germans know that if they are to conquer North Africa, they must force Malta to surrender. The intercept force lies in wait until the Allied convoy enters the strait between Tunisia and Sicily. There they attack. One by one, the ships of Operation Pedestal are sent to the bottom. But the ultimate prize for Axis gunners is the tanker Ohio, bearing precious fuel for Malta's aircraft. The lightly armed ship struggles forward under murderous fire.
Within a week, we would have surrendered, definitely. We were in our last days before extinction. everybody knew. We had no rations, no ammunition. Petrol had almost finished. No fighters could go up without petrol. If there is no tanker, we shall be lost. The important one was the tanker.
So really, this is the end.
Yes, it was the end.
If this doesn't come
That was definitely the end. There was a week, just a week supplies. We were just hoping that something comes down from heaven. That's why we call the arrival of the convoy, of the Santa Maria convoy, as a miracle. They were praying in churches to Santa Maria to do something, to let something to save Malta. We heard gunfire when it was attacked near Sicily. There was a warning sounded, a red warning, and the people, some of them, found the shelter. But there were those who remained still here. It appeared between the two lighthouses there, being cradled on two cables held by two destroyers. And of course there was the superstructure, all mangled with the bombs and the torpedo. Then everybody followed the Ohio until it went there. And they started immediately piping the oils out. There was joy all round, clapping. It was moving. I think it was the most moving sight in the whole war for us.
After the Ohio, things quietened down in Malta. In fact, the Germans didn't come back until October 10th. That's when they brought all their bombers back and they were going to punish Malta once again. But this time the Spits were waiting for them and they shot them down by the dozen. In 5 days, Burling added 8 to his total. But of course, that was his last battle of the war. He was shot down and injured and never flew again over Malta. Ian McLennan added 5 to his tally, including 2 junkers in 1 day. But the real changes were taking place in North Africa. On October 23rd, the 8th Army attacked Rommel's Africa Corps and started driving them back towards Tunisia. In November, the Americans landed in North Africa and they started a pincher movement. And basically, the war in North Africa was over. It was just a matter of time. After 2.5 years of aerial bombardments, the Siege of Malta was over. This is Cappuccini Naval Cemetery, south of Grand Harbor. And it was used by the British for more than 100 years. And there are 700 Second World War burials here. You can see how they're laid out, that the men are buried in crypts, in really a collective grave in a crypt. Then a large slab is put over top, and the details of the burials on top, with the cap badge of the associated unit. It also is, in many ways, the history of the Malta campaign. Buried in this crypt, there are 4 of the men killed at the bombing at Pont de Vue. And you can see here Baker, Guerin, the Australian, Hollis Hallett, and Waterfield were all killed in the doorway of the hotel. This one here, Pilot Officer Doug Lago, was shot down on the 20th of March, 1942, and his situation is quite infamous. He actually parachuted out of his plane. The German went over and machine gunned his canopy. So the parachute collapsed and Lego fell to his death. "7,000 people died in the defense of Malta, and by Second World War standards, that's a small number for such a decisive victory. All great campaigns are made up of a few mistakes, a few myths, and a few miracles, and Malta was no different. But really, it was the courage and tenacity of all the people who were here that saved the day, whether they be civilians, dock workers, gunners, merchant navy, Royal Navy, or Air Force. And it's really to these people that we should remember that they changed the course of the Second World War.